So, well, good morning. Welcome back. I was kind of wondering who would be here today, considering it's been like, what, 3 weeks? Um, Something like that, right? Because we missed a week for this. We had an interesting, has anybody seen or heard of the new Prime Video documentary, Shiny Happy People? Has anybody
Heard about it. We went to the Duggars.
has heard? Yeah, it's not about the Duggars per se. Now, I am not that familiar. I never watched any of the Duggars, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 and counting or whatever that show was. And I did not, and perhaps I would have noticed this at the time, but the thing about this particular video or this particular documentary is it kind of talks about the basis for the Duggar family, and that is the Institute in Basic Life Principles. Does that ring a bell with anybody? Bill Gothard? Anyone? It's headquartered right over here in Oak Brook. Over here, there's the building. He's not there anymore, but it's all about the Institute in Basic Life Principles. And again, you guys, no one else has heard of Bill Gothard?
Yeah.
But it's like this guy was huge. I mean, for a very long time. And I know members of the Gothard family. I have shaken Bill Gothard's hand. Bill Gothard spoke at my high school graduation because his niece was in my graduating class. And in fact, when I went to the basic seminar, in fact, I went to the basic seminar the same year that Bob Duggar went to the basic seminar. Not the same one, I don't think, but I don't know. There were 5,000 people there, and this was this huge thing. I mean, it was all word of mouth. There was no, again, this was the 1970s and 1980s. You know, you didn't have the internet or there wasn't TV advertising or anything like that. But I mean, it was huge, and it kind of talks about, and so we've had these interesting conversations over the last 24 hours about this. Because one of the things about Bill Gothard, and again, it's a parachurch ministry. Let's call it that. It's not a church. It's a parachurch ministry that looks to present biblical principles for life, living, family, relationships. The whole. I mean, it kind of like in 1 week, pretty much. Here's how to live, everything. Kind of like Francis Schaeffer once wrote a book called "What Should We Then Thus Do?" or something like that. How shall we then live? That. How shall we then live? And that's like, well, Bill Gothard explains it all in a week. Here's exactly how you should live, and then all kinds of different stuff. And people just ate this up, big time. Yes.
Well,
oh, you'd love it. You'd love it. Oh, you would. You. In fact,
I'm sure I would need it.
Let's just screen it next week, and I want you to be in the front row.
I'm trying to figure out if this was a good thing.
Well, it depends on who you ask.
A thing that started out good and changed, or people doing the wrong thing for the right reason?
It depends on who you ask, kind of thing. Basically, if you're a white male property owner, cisgender type, then it's a wonderful thing. Anything else, not so much. But it's part of one of the reasons for the explosion of the homeschool movement was Bill Gothard. The Bill Gothard, the Institute in Basic, when I went, it was called the Institute in Basic Youth Conflicts. Now it's called the Institute in Basic Life Principles. There are, as you watch it, it's interesting that, again, this was so huge back in my younger days. Not that I'm not in my younger days now. I'm still in my younger days, my younger days. But it was so huge, and even now you watch it, and you just see these things, and you go, oh, that's not, no, that, no.
Can you clarify why wasn't it right?
Well, for example, within this universe, there was this authority structure. That there's a natural authority structure according to the Bible, and it starts with Christ, God, Christ, God, and then it's man, the husband, and then under the husband is the wife, and under the wife are the children. So this is the basic family structure, okay? And everyone is accountable and subject to, and there's this umbrella of things that go on, that if you're under your umbrella, nothing's going to happen to you, that God will protect you, kind of thing. And so you had, and it was part of, and this is part of where the Duggars come. Now, has anybody watched the show 19 and Counting or 15 and Counting? Are you familiar with the show? Okay. One of their things was that there's sort of an ancillary group to this called the Quiverful families, ministry. I don't know what it was movement. Yeah, the Quiverful movement. And the point of the Quiverful movement, and this again is something from the 80s and the 90s and probably going into the 21st century, was that you should have as many kids as the Lord allows you to. Hence, the Duggars had 19. And within, and they were going through this, and they were saying that there were other TV shows for other families, that every other cable channel kind of thing wanted to have their own thing, and so how you managed that was how you managed that within this Quiverful, within the basic youth conflicts. They kind of were I don't know if they were the same, but they were very closely allied. Relied much on this whole authority structure, and of course, in this authority structure, the husband, father, is the pater familias. That's it. I mean, they literally were talking about, this behavioral contracts in this. So they'll talk about, like, within this movement, people that were within the Gothard community, not necessarily the Quiverful, where there were, and this is all within the religious, this is what the Bible wants kind of thing, conservative evangelicalism, that you had, behavioral contracts between that you would present to the kids and to the wife, ladies. Okay, that involved, that there were things about how the husband could punish the wife. Yes. Let's, next time I do a wedding, that's what I'm gonna talk about. I'm gonna.
I want to hear Debbie's sermon.
Oh, yes, no.
Husband disciplining.
Yeah, she's been quite enthusiastic about her opinion of this for the last 24 hours. I mean, like every 45 minutes, I was woke up last night. What bugged me about that? Can I go back to sleep now? No, because you know what else bugged me about that? Kind of thing, but no. And it's interesting, and so they really identified a culture war in the 80s and 90s, and the culture war was and they said one of the best ways to defeat the culture war was to create quiverfuls, your whole family, and then again that caused the homeschooling movement to explode in the 90s, and then there was all kinds of other weird things where just a lot of weirdness, and as you might imagine, you have this guy who was speaking to thousands of people. They estimate something like 2 million people have been through this particular thing. That of course, and he of course never married. Never married.
So his quiver wasn't full.
Well, that depends on who you ask. Again, so there was some issues there, and it's what's interesting about it, and there's so many things that's interesting about it. Again, it's like, I'm sitting there watching this, and just as recently, I don't think he was a member, but he was a regular attender up until the time he's still alive. I think he lives in Florida now, but up until the time he moved, which would have been sometime during the pandemic, I believe, he was a regular attender at my parents' church, the church I grew up at. In fact, the last time I was there, which would have been, I don't know, 2018, 2019, something like that. The last time I was at my parents' church, I remember I in the pew, everything, because my mom is like the Linda King of that church. Okay, so she is the original member, They're coming up on their 50th anniversary this year. My mother was at the first service of the church. I was at the second. But my mother was at the first service of the church. But so we were there, and I stood up to go, turned to, you know how you turn to walk out of the, and then all of a sudden this guy walks in, like, and my mom's like, oh yeah, that's Bill Gothard. Yeah, he's been going here for, you know, I mean, he was kicked out of the ministry there and all of that. But it's interesting. And so there are a lot of people who were blessed and were able to work within this environment. But there are a lot of people in our community, our religious community, that were tremendously hurt by it as well. So it's just kind of an interesting, you know, I mean, I went to the Basic Youth Conflict Seminar, and I sat next to his niece all the time I was there. It was at the International Amphitheater in Chicago. I mean, this is how big this was. He could sell out for a week the International Amphitheater in Chicago. It wasn't a transformative experience to me because I was, you know, 18 and knew everything. By then, I'd been progressively getting dumber ever since. But, you know, that was the peak of how much I knew right then. So he wasn't, but you know, he among other things, he was convinced and taught that Cabbage Patch Dolls, that the creator of Cabbage Patch Dolls was a warlock. And so nobody in this group had Cabbage Patch Dolls. They didn't have that.
Well, of course, everybody knows that.
Yeah. Yeah, he said that one of the things that I remember from him being there, and this is one of these interesting things, is that he stated that the you know, every Rolling Stones album came with a demon.
Every what? Actual
Rolling Stones
came.
album. Every Rolling Stone album came with its own demon. And I look at that now and snicker, yeah. But you know what? I have never bought a Rolling Stones album. It's like, you know, fortunately they're not my favorite group, so I don't really have to worry about it. But it's like, you know, I've never really been a whole lot tempted because in the back of my mind I go, what if Bill Gothard was right? What do you know,
Just one.
Yeah. Even a broken clock is right twice a day, or even a blind pig finds a truffle every night, something, or there's some. What if, you know? So it's interesting. It's an interesting thing. I would have liked a better, more of a takedown of the beliefs behind it, or the doctrinal basis behind it, if that makes sense. You know, they said this is how it goes. Okay, so how did you get to that conclusion? But that wasn't. You know, this is an Amazon video, so they're not going to get that deep into it. They're just kind of going to look either, you know. And these guys have an agenda. Don't get me wrong. Yes.
As your shoe was,
Oh.
Yeah.
No, that's okay, I was gonna wait till the end, because my question was about the show, if it was, you know, as a documentary, there's always a skew, and I didn't know if it's, you know, even though you know they have an agenda, it's
Yeah.
still educational way to find out about
It is. I think it is. I think it is. I mean, I don't, you know, you were.
I learned a lot from it. I mean, we were just utterly fascinated because, again, we know people in this, and
I know members of the Gothard family.
from there, a lot of things there that we had no idea were going on. I mean, we watched all 4
And
episodes
they're
in one
confident
night.
that
Oh, wow.
they're not lying, or they're not
It's
embellishing
accurate.
or
It's
exaggerating.
accurate.
I believe that everybody that's interviewed on that show absolutely believes everything they're saying. Now, you know, so they don't interview a lot. They only interviewed actually one of the actual Duggar family. Okay, and of course
Of the
kids.
And a cousin.
And the cousin. So
sister of the dad.
yeah, but the sister of the dad wasn't really part of the show. So there's only one of the kids that is actually talked about in depth. And of course, one of the Duggars is the oldest Duggar child is in jail for possession of child pornography.
Yeah, and I heard that he molested his own sister.
Yes,
Yep.
that was part of the whole.
Yeah.
There's several things wrong with the first, but the interesting thing is the family, and we were talking about this on the way in, and this has very little to do with Ecclesiastes.
I was trying to see, I came in late and I'm like,
Yeah, yeah,
New under the sun.
yes, nothing new under the sun. That's what it is, kind of thing. Yeah, it's interesting. And I think part of the point that the authors or that the producers want to make, of course, there's a voyeuristic element to it. You know, there's that, and then there is this whole, you know, kind of like, really, there's people in 2023 who are still, you know, doing this, and yeah, there are. I mean, the institute is still around. It's not nearly as big or as influential as it used to be, but it's still around. You can still get these different things, and some of the stuff, you know, again, is really, really big on, you know, that for women, very controlling for women. I mean, there is a certain hairstyle. They had books where they would have pictures of different hairstyles, and basically it's like, this is the right hairstyle, this is the wrong hairstyle, kind of thing. And you would look at the hairstyles and you would say, to me, it's like, that's hair. But no, there was a certain, you know, and they're very, very controlling.
I wonder where bald fits in.
Yeah. You know.
Wrong for a woman.
Yeah. Yes, because short hair is bad. Shorter hair is bad. The longer hair is better, and all of that. And dresses. And one of the girls was talking about how they had to, you know, all the girls always wore dresses, and in the dresses, like especially when they were young, they wore pantaloons underneath the dresses. And then so she's sitting there next to the guy who's now her husband, and she says she has to explain to him what pantaloons are, you know, and this is part of the, you know, here's what pantaloons are. Of course, they never say anything about culottes. You know, anybody remember culottes? Culottes.
Yes.
See, I seem to recall in our behavior contract that Debbie was supposed to wear culottes, and she never. I don't know, something like that. So yeah, it's on Prime Video, but it's kind of an interesting walk down recent church history.
What's it called?
Shiny Happy People, which I always thought was interesting because that's an REM song, and I, you know, it's kind of although they don't quote the song at all in there, it's just. It's interesting to watch and see, you know, because the family has the wagon circled here, pretty much. Even the one who's being interviewed, you know, when they're talking about the abuse, you know, whatever exactly happened, and it's never quite clear when they talk about the oldest son abusing his younger daughters. It's never quite clear exactly what he did. There's kind of speculation, but she is being interviewed. She's like, oh, I don't want to talk about this. Should have never gotten out in public. Okay, you know, and Debbie, of course, at this point is she's like burning she's building the stick in the fire to burn the guy at the stake. I mean, that's you know, that was part of our behavior contract that we signed when we got married. Was basically, if I do anything wrong, it's like going to be, you know, a auto da fe kind of thing. But yeah, so
Not just that the son did this, it's just the way the family, the dad covered this up and protected him, and nothing, you know, the way they treated the daughters. Unbelievable.
so yeah, so
What does it have to do with the Gothard?
they are what's
Gothard's poster
yeah.
child family. I mean, they spoke at institutes and promoted it.
Over and over and over again. They show a lot of different things, and so they're like, you know, they followed Gothard's principles to keep the family in line and all of that kind of stuff. And it kind of has a lot to do with some of this, and they would talk about some of the things that Gothard would teach, like blanket training. Has anybody heard of blanket training? Blanket training.
It's very similar to that was in Growing Kids God's Word.
Yeah. I'm like, so the idea is that you put a young kid, you know, very, very young child on a blanket, and you pick something that he or she likes, and you set it off the blanket. And then when the child reaches for it, you correct the child in some way. And you keep doing that until the child learns not to reach for something.
See, something, that doesn't sound right.
I'm not making it up. I'm just saying this is, this is one of the things that they talked about as this is, oh yeah, and this is how you train up children to be very obedient. And I guess that's right. I mean, I suppose there's a certain, you could keep them in handcuffs all day too. I don't know if it's necessarily a good idea. I'm not a child development person kind of thing. Debbie, I don't remember. Debbie and I went through one of the Growing Kids God's Way sessions, not willingly. It wasn't, we were dating at the time, right? We weren't married. Yeah, we were dating at the time. That's awkward. You walk into your Sunday school and, hey, guess what? We're going to do a Growing Kids God's Way, how to raise children. Oh, okay. So what's for lunch, dear? Kind of thing. But yeah, it was, that's not brought up in there, although there's some tie-ins with that as well, I guess. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. So that's your assignment for the week. Go home and watch that and come back next week. And if we're here, we'll talk about it. A screening.
Just remember, there was a good review on the Gospel Coalition website, Gospel Coalition. Someone was actually interviewed. It was kind of part of the movement and was interviewed in the course of I actually featured in there as one of the persons interviewed in it. So
Who was that?
I can't remember the name. I just read the review of Shiny Happy People.
'Cause I don't remember seeing anybody labeled as being from the Gospel Coalition in there.
No. It was, that's where the review appears. If you want to find the review, you
Oh.
can find it at the Gospel Coalition.
Oh, I see.
website.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, if you're a huge fan of Bill Gothard, you're not going to like this show. But again, it's an interesting. Again, what our recent church history, because again, this was huge. I mean, it was huge kind of thing.
We didn't have the internet, so we didn't know all those things about it.
Right. Yeah, and there were. Okay, I'm sorry. I told Debbie coming in. I said, maybe we'll just spend the whole time talking about shiny, happy people. But I think the way to make some really shiny, happy people would be to finish Ecclesiastes. Yeah, but today is June 4th, and I would be remiss if I did not point out that on this date in 1896, Henry Ford drove his first Ford down the streets of Detroit. His first vehicle being a 31-year, 8-month employee of the Ford Motor Company. Any chance we have to propagate the creation myth, as it's called. Henry Ford built the car in the garage and opened the door and put it out. Yeah, that's exactly what they call it, the creation myth. There in Ford. In 1919, and I'll let you decide whether this was a good or a bad thing. It was in 1919 on this date that the U.S. Congress passed the 19th Amendment. That's when women got the right to vote. Now, I'm guessing Bill Gothard did not think that is a great thing, but be that as it may. Speaking of early history stuff that I find interesting, it was on this date in 1931 that Carl McIntyre was ordained. Does anybody know who Carl McIntyre was? You know who Carl, I mentioned him last night. Carl McIntyre was the other fundamentalist through the 20th century. You've heard about like Bob Jones and John R. Rice and all of those guys. But in the background was Carl McIntyre. He kind of like ties everybody together, and he was very much in the anti-communism kind of John Birch. I don't know that he was directly tied to John Birch, but that sort of a movement. And he was very well known as a fundamentalist leader, but he was never quite as well known because he never built a college and named it after him. So I guess that's but he was ordained on this date in 1931. 9 years later, in 1940, today is the day of the Miracle of Dunkirk. Miracle of Dunkirk, where 338,000 British and French Allied soldiers were evacuated from the coast of France using something like 800 boats, rowboats, fishing boats, kind of schooners.
About Winston Churchill kind of like gives that background on that.
Yeah. So, and it was there was a movie called Dunkirk that came out a couple years ago, with Kenneth Branagh in it. which is interesting. But that was on this date. It was like, really, on the one hand, it really was a colossal defeat on the part of the British. Okay, I mean, it was they were pushed back to the edge, and it should have been the end of the war. Okay, but for a number of reasons, and it wasn't, and not the least of which is they were able to the British people everybody had a boat, got in their boat, went across, grabbed who they could, brought them back across, and when the dust settled, 338,000. That's a lot of people to be carrying in rowboats and that kind of stuff. But 4 years later, 1944, it was on this date that the German submarine U-505 was captured. Sound familiar to anyone? Yeah. How many have been to the U-505? Yes, it was on this date. It was the first time a German submarine had been captured at sea, captured and boarded at sea. They'd come close, but the Germans would always sink it. And it's been a while since I've been there. I mean, I've only been there once since they brought it inside. You know how they got this whole big inside thing now? But it's
there?
the Museum of Science and Industry.
Oh, Museum of Science. Okay, I didn't hear that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Have you not been to the U-505?
No, I have not. I want to.
Enrique. Okay, before you watch Shiny Happy People, you have to go. But yeah, it's at the Museum of Science and Industry. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, this is correct. Steve Arnhammer's company, now he wasn't around at the time, but Steve Arnhammer's company was instrumental in getting the U-505 to its present location.
Which company is that?
It's
He works for a
dredging company.
Oh, okay.
His company was instrumental in doing that. And finally, today is King George III's birthday. It's a real British theme thing today. King George III, you may remember as being the only white Anglo-Saxon in Hamilton. But, you'll be back, that song. But yeah, King George III, who actually went a little nutty at the end of his life for a number of reasons, but actually lived from 1738 until 1820. So quite some time. So I know, what about Ecclesiastes? Well, actually, in my opinion, I was looking at it, I mean, it's kind of a quick ending, so that's why I'm not feeling too bad about this.
A little known fact on today, 1951, my sister was
Okay. Happy birthday to your sister, Okay, so we're going to finish Ecclesiastes today. Yay! We're going to finish Ecclesiastes today, kind of finishing up the last section. And I've titled this Things to Remember When You're Young, because that's kind of what the summary is. Kohelet, and then we're going to come back to the frame narrator at the end, is going to come back and say, okay, what's this all about? What's the bottom line here? Kind of thing. And he repeats a lot of stuff, and I put at the bottom, just in case anybody is wondering where in the Bible that is from, where there needs no ghost, my Lord, come from the grave to tell us this. That is not from the Bible. That's from at Shea Ray. That's our other Bible, Shakespeare. I'm just kidding. That's from Hamlet, where there's a line in there, and that's a line that gets used a lot around Shea Ray, where when one of us repeats something obvious to the other, we go, well, there needs no ghost come from beyond the grave, my Lord, to tell us this. So, beginning in chapter 11 and 12 finishes it up, and we talked last time, which was several weeks ago, it seems. We talked about 7 and 8. Light is sweet and it pleases the eyes to see the sun. If you remember, we talked about that and said that it's good to be alive. Talking about Lynn Bramer, the XRT disc jockey that used to say that all the time. And it pleases the eye. And this passage sets up a structure that takes place over the next couple of passages, and that is a similar structure where it says, enjoy life, but be warned. So our first line there is, enjoy life, but be warned. So again, light is sweet and it pleases the eye. However many years anyone may live, let them enjoy them all. But, so again, enjoy your life, but remember, let them remember the days of darkness, for there will be many. Everything to come is meaningless. So in light of death, I say here with 11:7, Q begins his conclusion. Light is sweet, it's good to be alive. Enjoy the years you may have, but don't forget, it's all Hebel. It's all Hebel. Everything under the sun is Hebel. And again, when Kohelet is talking about under the sun, he's talking about life in the presence of the Creator God, but not the covenant God. Okay, so essentially he's like, look, when you take a personal God out of the equation, ultimately the best you're going to get is a happy life. Not that there's anything wrong with a happy life, but in terms of, but that's the best you're going to get. And you're going to have all of these other issues. So here's what, under the sun, in this scenario, here's what you need to remember, okay? In verse 9, you who are young, be happy while you're young. Okay? That's pretty sound. Be happy while you're young. And just, it's not here, but I think, be happy when you're old, too. It's nice, I'm just saying. And let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. This is kind of a carpe diem sort of, seize the day, enjoy your life while you can. Okay? Follow the ways of your heart and whatever your eyes see, but know that for all things, God will bring you into judgment. Okay, so again, and to Kohelet, this is all arbitrary. This is all, and so enjoy yourself. You're going to get judged for it. This is kind of like, should you do that? Yeah, I'm going to hate myself in the morning for doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Not that anyone here has ever used that sort of reasoning. I try to limit those kind of things to like 7 days a week, things, I'm going to hate myself in the morning for doing this, or kind of be happy, but remember God will bring judgment. Where am I? Follow the ways of your heart, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. So then, banish anxiety from your heart. Don't get upset about it. There's nothing you can do. Now, this is not exactly my younger son has just started his career as a therapist. He's got a master's degree in social work, and he's been hired by, and he's starting to do therapy. So in case, we should bring his card and pass this. Roscoe, Debbie has one of his cards. And so we've been giving him advice on what to say. Yeah. So this is one of those verses here. Just use this verse. Banish anxiety. There you go. It's a wonder why I'm not in the therapy business, right? It's kind of like, when you're dealing with somebody with depression, just say, well, just be happy. How difficult can that be? Just be happy, And so we say that kind of stuff, and we just get that look. You all know that look from when you get the older kids, that, oh, silly parents look. But be that. So then banish anxiety and cast off the troubles of your body, for youth and vigor are meaningless, are Hebel. It's all chasing after the wind. To a certain extent, this is kind of like reminds me of the statement, youth is wasted on the young. You ever heard that? But so banish anxiety, for youth and vigor are Hebel. Q's final conclusion coming up here. Chapter 12, beginning with verse 1. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. And that's a fairly common passage that we hear from Ecclesiastes. People will say, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Okay, and it's good advice. Although, again, one of the things I would, when I get to the end here, and I'll talk about what do we do with Ecclesiastes. One of the things that we should do is just don't use a verse in Ecclesiastes to prove anything. just again, not a place to get life verses from. Okay, but be that as it may, and he gives, and he's remember your Creator in the days of your youth, and then he gives a series of images because this is what's going to happen because you're going to get old, is really what he's talking about. And now he's going to do a series of images of what it means to be old. Okay? And it's kind of interesting. It says, so before, and I know, we all know old people, so maybe, I know nobody in here is old, but maybe we can talk about other people we know that have talked about this kind of stuff, sort of stuff. My dad died when he was 78 years old, and really, whenever I would accuse him of being old, his response was always, well, I'll let you know when I get there, kind of thing. So, be that as it may, it says, so before the days of trouble come, old age, before the days of trouble come, and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark. Okay, so here it's starting to give several images of old age. Before light goes dark, okay, trouble with eyesight. Okay, just not seeing as well. Before light goes dark, and the moon and the stars grow dark, and the clouds return after the rain, when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men stoop. Okay, probably troubles with balance. The strong, signs, images of old age. When the grinders cease because they are few. So what do we think? What are we talking about here? Teeth, right? You start losing your teeth. When the grinders cease because they are few. And those looking through the windows grow dim. Okay, so again, here might be another reference to eyesight. When the doors to the street are closed and the sound of grinding fades. Sound fades, possible hearing. Okay, again, these are just sort of things to look forward to. For those, when you're talking to somebody who's old, you can say, when people rise up at the sound of birds. Okay?
4:30.
Yes, waking up way earlier in the morning. It's like I'm talking to these kids these days, in the school, and they're talking about, I slept till noon.
Yeah.
And I cannot remember the last time I slept till noon. I'm like, I cannot remember the last time I made it past 6:30 in the morning. Like, to me, that is like, wow, man, what a bum. It's 6:30 and I'm still in bed. Woohoo, I've really achieved something, kind of thing. And then again, I'm told when, as people get older, you wake up earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier. But then you're waking up earlier, but you can't hear the birds because your hearing is going. Okay? So again, remember your Creator now before this is what your life is. Waking up and hearing, you can't hear the birds even though you know they're out there. When people rise up to the sound of birds, where am I? But all their songs grow faint. When people are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets, when the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper, I said, well, when people are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets, again, I don't have a line for this, I should have, just kind of a heightened anxiety. Just a sort of a heightened anxiety that comes with being older, okay? And when the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper drags itself along and desire no longer is stirred. This may refer to the romantic desires. You reach an age where it's like, no. Okay? So these are like, remember your Creator now, enjoy your youth now, because this is what's ahead of you. So again, Kohelet is like Mr. Positivity here. Okay, he's like, this is what your life is going to become like. Enjoy your life now. And then people, desire no longer is turned, then people go to their eternal home and mourners go about the streets. And when would they do that? When do mourners go into a street? At a funeral. Remember he said earlier that death is the end of everything? The rich man, the poor man, the animals, and people, we all die, that's it. Death is the end. And if you didn't miss the point about dying, Remember him before the silver cord is severed. Now he's going to give you 4 ways of looking, describing dying. You remember your Creator before the silver cord is severed. Okay. You ever talk about, what happened to so-and-so? Well, if I did that, whatever happened to Bill Gothard? And I go, would you think, oh, he's living happily on the Côte d'Azur? No, you think, well, he's probably dead. Okay, he's not. He's living in Florida. Or he might be on the Côte d'Azur. I don't know. And the golden bowl is broken before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the wheel broken at the well. 4 kind of pictures. The silver cord is severed. The golden bowl is broken. The pitcher is shattered. The wheel is broken. In other words, before you die, when the dust returns to God in Genesis 3:19, compare that to, in other words, when you die, when the dust returns to God, verse 7, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Okay, so again, remember in Genesis 3:19, for dust you are, and dust you shall return, etc. You're going to have a handout if you want it. So all of this is, enjoy your life, enjoy what you can, live for the fullness that you can, because ultimately your life is going to wind down and you're going to die. Okay? And then Kohelet just kind of summarizes everything here in verse 8. Meaningless, Hebel, that word Hebel. Meaningless, says the teacher, everything is meaningless. Okay? Now in verse 9, we see the return of the frame narrator. Remember we talked about the frame narrator, that Kohelet's writings starts in chapter 1, beginning around, I forget, verse 12, I think, and it goes here. So you have this frame narrator. It says, all right, here, I'm going to tell you, here's this Kohelet, he's a super wise guy, here's what he says about life, boom, and now at the end, Kohelet comes, or the frame narrator comes back and says, here, let me summarize everything. Not only, in verse 9, he says, not only was the teacher wise, that is Kohelet, okay? Not only was the teacher wise, but he also imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. The teacher searched to find just the right words, and what he wrote was upright and true. So he says, in summary, let's see. 12:8 through 14 sees the return of the frame narrator. In case you missed Q's point, 12:8 reminds us that everything is Hebel. In summary, the frame narrator believes that Kohelet was wise, a good teacher, a deep thinker, particular about his words, and what he wrote was upright and true. Okay, and I think it is, and I'll explain what I mean here in a minute when we get to the end of things. Okay, the words of the wise. Verse 11, the words of the wise are like goads, their collected sayings like firmly embedded nails, given by one shepherd. Be warned, my son, in anything in addition to them. Now, this is one of these tricky kind of sentences. It's like, okay, we don't really know what he means. Let's put it that way. Okay, one idea is that, okay, I'm putting this out here to goad you into thinking, to make you ponder how your life is going, to put up an alternative view of life. Okay? Or another one is to say, you know what? Don't take this too seriously. Okay, don't go too far with this. When he said don't add anything in addition to them. Some people have looked at this verse and thrown it in there with the other verses about, like don't add to the Bible. Here's don't add. Well, I think you're really gone beyond the text if you're using it in that way. Okay? But still, the words of the wise are like goads, and and he's including that it's supposed to spur you towards something. It's supposed to spur you towards something. Okay? And then, of course, a verse that we all at one point or another in our academic career have probably quoted, of making many books there is no end, and much study wearies the body. So especially when you went to a Christian school, that was a verse that you really wanted to use a lot. in the public school, it didn't really help. The Bible says much study wearies the body. It didn't really help a whole lot. But in a Christian school, you could say, well, here it is, okay? Of making many books there is no end. Making many books there is no end, and much study wearies the body. And again, now in verse 13 and 14, the frame narrator is going to say, put it all together. After all that Kohelet has said, after all of that about under the sun and what do we know, now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. So the bottom line for the frame narrator of this book is, in Micah 6:8, what does the Lord require but to do justly, love mercy, act humbly?
Walk humbly with your God.
Yeah, that's it. That's kind of the bottom line sort of thing for the frame narrator. And this is like, when I read that and thinking of this as the conclusion, okay, for God, fear God, keep his commandments, this is the duty of all mankind. This is my first thought was, needs not a ghost come from beyond the grave to tell us this, my Lord, kind of thing, And so that's it for Ecclesiastes. Now that led me to several thoughts about Ecclesiastes. And most of them were like centered on the question, why is this book in the Bible?
That was my question. I was going to ask you.
Why is this book in the Bible? And I don't have the definitive answer. I mean, I have the standard answer. I know the standard answer why this is in the Bible, because the same reason all the other books are in the Bible. But it's like, if you think about Ecclesiastes, there isn't, I don't think you can, there are people that claim that you can go to any book in the Bible and find the gospel in it. I don't think you can do that in Ecclesiastes. If you're following the context of what Kohelet is saying, I don't think you can really find the gospel itself in the book of Ecclesiastes. But I think the problem with our thinking that way, that this is, and I still think that if somebody were to put a gun to my head and said, listen, I am going to kill you unless you take one book out of the Bible, I'm going to, Ecclesiastes, you can have it. Okay? But I think part of the problem is the way we look at the text. We look at the text in 21st century Christianity as a series of proof text, as a series of immediate applications to us. And when you look at it that way, when you look at the text that way, and you look at the book of Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiastes is a black hole. I mean, it is like, there is, you cannot, no, it just no. I'm like, you can't, and this is why I'm like, don't use a verse from Ecclesiastes to support anything, okay? I mean, I would not use, I was at an event yesterday where somebody used a verse from Ecclesiastes. Now, the Bible says. I'm like, not Ecclesiastes. So what does Ecclesiastes tell you? What does Ecclesiastes tell you? Ecclesiastes tells you, there's a very important point to Ecclesiastes, okay? And one of them came from, I was just reading this book this week, 3 Philosophies of Life, by a guy named Peter Kreeft. And he's looking at 3 of the wisdom books, Ecclesiastes, Job, and Song of Songs. And he was like, what is the philosophy of life, or what does Ecclesiastes present to us? Okay, Ecclesiastes presents to us the best that life can be without God. Okay, so it's like, we don't need God in our life. Okay, then you're Ecclesiastes. So can you be happy? Yes. Kohelet says you can be happy. Be happy. Enjoy yourself. Is it going to be meaningful? No. It's life without God. It's meaningless. It's Hebel. What does Ecclesiastes teach us? Ecclesiastes tells us that life without the covenant God, and from a New Testament perspective, life without Christ, life without why did Christ have to come? Ecclesiastes. Because without the incarnation, without the crucifixion, without the resurrection, we're stuck with Ecclesiastes. Okay? Again, Ecclesiastes is life without God. let me just read one, which I thought was a really good. I'm going to have to find it here. The point is simply this: without God, no, not just without God, for the author of Ecclesiastes speaks frequently of God. Without faith in God. No, not even that, for the author has faith in God, in fact, an unquestioning faith. Never does he doubt God's existence. Rather, without the kind of faith in God that is larger than life and therefore worth dying for and therefore worth living for, without a faith that means trust and hope and love, without a lived love affair with God, life is a vanity of vanities, the shadow of a shadow, a dream within a dream. Okay, so it's like, I don't need God in my life. Well, at a certain level, that is true. You can live without God having an active role in your life. And you're going to be Kohelet. So I think Ecclesiastes is a very powerful message we look at the message of the book of Ecclesiastes. And again, I didn't really want, having gone through it the way I did, I realized why so few people go through it the way I did. But I'm very glad I did. Now, I don't know that I ever will again. Maybe, I don't know. But it's like, without God, this is what you've got. I'm sorry. Without God, without a personal relationship with God, this is what your life is. This is the best it is ever going to be for you. And is there anything appealing, if you look at what he's saying, is there anything appealing or really that appealing about life as described by Kohelet? Most people, if you're reasonably reading the book, would go, no. What's missing? God. So in other words, one way that this author puts about it, he says, Ecclesiastes is the question, and the rest of the Bible is the answer. It's like, okay, why do we need all of this? Why did we need the creation? Why did we need God in the garden? Why did we need the kingdom? Why did we need the incarnation and resurrection? Why do we need the church? Because if we don't have that, we're left with Ecclesiastes.
Well, and then it kind of explains too why when you're younger, you might not think you need God because you do have, unless there's hardship or something, you're healthier, you're vibrant, and you're kind of looking at it from like a pure, like, humanistic viewpoint. And if you get to be older, you might start thinking a little bit more introspectively because you do start losing your senses. And that's one thing I've learned from being a nurse, that taking care of people that make it to 90, it's like if they still are there, they all have like some kind of sensory loss, but they're more introspective than they were when you compare it to like a 20-year-old.
Mm-hmm. So overall, it's like, is it a good thing is Kohelet wrong? I don't think he's wrong. I think he's just saying the best in life, the best that life has to offer is good, it's enjoyable, but without God, it's Hebel. It's meaningless. It's vanity. It's us chasing after the wind.
But isn't that what we're trying to teach our kids too, through our youth group and everything? They don't understand what God really is right now as a young adult. And we're trying to teach them that this is what they need in life in order to understand that this is the better thing to have.
Yes.
If that makes sense of what I'm trying
Yeah.
to say.
Well, I think, yeah.
They just don't know the difference between, yes, you do need God in your life, but if you don't have God in your life, then what is the...
Well, go back to what, yeah. Well, go back to what Kreeft says here. It is, again, the framed narrator believes in God.
Uh-huh.
Okay, he believes in a creator God. He believes that there's a judgment. Okay, but it's not the covenant God. It's not the God that wants to fellowship with the nation. And without that sort of relationship, even if you're like going to church, you're just going to be like, kind of thing. I'm sorry, Paul. You've adopted the I have something I want to say position.
I agree with everything.
Yeah.
And just something that maybe.
Well, I'm done. Paul said he agrees with everything. We're out of here.
What Ecclesiastes does for me is, for a lot of people, it's their favorite book. And there's part of me that understands that, in the sense that as we go through life, there are so many things that we experience in terms of our thoughts and emotions. We experience despair and joy and lament and ecstasy and disappointment, all these different things that we experience in our lives. And we look for common ground with others who have experienced those things as well. And we want someone else, has someone else expressed that? Has someone else felt what I feel? And I need a voice that says, you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, Ecclesiastes does that with regard to the cynicism and the despair that can afflict many of us and has afflicted me at different times in my life of, oh, what's the use? What's the bloody use? You try to do this and it doesn't work. You know, you want to accomplish this, you want to have a purpose-driven life, you have this goal, the other dream, and it all comes crashing down, or even if you accomplish your dream, it feels worthless. And so many people have experienced that. And
they think they're unusual, and they think that something's wrong with them.
And then they come to Ecclesiastes. Yes, he gets it. Yeah, I know, I get that feeling. And that is something that Ecclesiastes can contribute to those who know exactly what he's talking about. And thank you. Yes, you said it. Yeah, that's right.
It's the book. It's the message of the book. Again, it's like no individual. Again, don't use verses from Ecclesiastes to support any practice. Just there are 65 other books in the Bible to choose from. Just pick another one, kind of thing. Just don't go there. But yeah.
I don't want to drown in despair, but I want someone else to express it.
Yeah.
You know, as well.
I'm not alone.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not alone. Yeah. But I like the idea that Ecclesiastes is the question and the rest of the Bible is the answer. Sort of stuff. And it's, you know, we're kind of hung up that you know, back in creation, God said, okay, there's going to be 66 books, and we're going to start with Genesis, Exodus, and like the order of the books has been set for like hundreds of years. And I think Luther was the last one to fool around with the order of the books. But it's like if you got a book, if you got a Bible, if somebody sent a Bible to you and it was the New Testament and it was John, Luke, Mark, Matthew, we would freak out. There would be a disconnect. We'd be going, whoa, wait a minute. No. John has to kind of, that there's something spiritual, the fact that Matthew follows Mark, or that Ecclesiastes is stuck in the middle. You know, I don't know how it's ordered in the Hebrew Bible or whether they thought about it, but it's like, you know, you can say Ecclesiastes, you know, again, I like that Ecclesiastes is the question, the rest of the Bible is the answer. So does Ecclesiastes have to make sense within itself? Not necessarily. It's asking a bunch of questions. It's putting out a position, and the rest of the Bible is going to answer them. You know, so you're going to see things in Ecclesiastes that are not. You could look at it and go, "Wow, that contradicts something else in the Bible." Well, yeah. You know, so when Ecclesiastes says this is the way things work, and the rest of the Bible says, "Oh no, it's not." You know, with the power of God in our lives, this is how things can work. That's, which are you going to choose? You know, I'm like, Hebel? No. Any other thoughts on Ecclesiastes? Speak now, because it's going to be a long time before anybody's going to touch Ecclesiastes here, I'm going to tell you that. Okay, well, I'm done. Next week we're going to do, if we do next week, I'm going to, one day, on Song of Solomon. We're going to go through Song of Solomon in one day. That's my theory. That's my goal. We're going to do Song of Solomon in one day.